Jasper had lived in Miller's Pond for 3 seasons, and in that time, he'd grown from a tadpole no bigger than a pebble into the largest bullfrog the wetland had ever seen. His deep, resonant calls could be heard for miles on summer nights, a sound that had become as much a part of the landscape as the cattails swaying in the breeze. But this morning was different. Jasper's powerful hind legs pushed him to the surface, and what he saw made his throat sac deflate with worry. The water level had dropped dramatically overnight. Where yesterday there had been 3 feet of murky, life-giving water, now only 18 inches remained. The drought that had been threatening the region for weeks had finally arrived at his doorstep. The other creatures were already in panic mode. The painted turtles had begun their slow migration toward the deeper creek a half-mile away. The red-winged blackbirds chattered nervously from their perches, and even the usually fearless great blue heron had abandoned its hunting grounds. But Jasper was different from the others. At nearly 8 inches from nose to tail, he was too large to make the dangerous overland journey that the smaller frogs could attempt. This pond wasn't just his home. It was his fortress, and he would have to defend it. As the sun climbed higher, Jasper noticed the water temperature rising faster than usual. The shallow depth meant less thermal mass to absorb the heat, and he could feel his metabolism accelerating in response. He needed to conserve energy, but he also needed to eat. The drought would mean fewer insects, and competition for food would become fierce. By midday, disaster struck in the form of a family of raccoons. They discovered that the receding water had left dozens of small fish trapped in isolated pools, easy pickings for their nimble paws. But raccoons weren't picky eaters, and Jasper knew that a bullfrog his size would make an excellent meal. He watched from beneath a partially submerged log as the largest raccoon, a scarred old male, tested the water with one paw. Jasper's survival instincts kicked in. Instead of fleeing, he did something unexpected. He dove deeper and began to burrow into the soft mud at the bottom of the pond. His powerful legs worked like shovels, creating a small depression in the sediment. It was a technique he'd observed the smaller frogs use during winter, but never something he'd needed to try himself. The mud was cool and oxygen-rich, fed by a small underground spring that he'd never noticed before. As he settled into his makeshift bunker, Jasper realized he'd stumbled upon the pond's secret. This wasn't just any depression in the landscape. It was fed by groundwater that would continue flowing even if the surface water disappeared entirely. For the next several hours, he remained hidden while the raccoons splashed and hunted above. Their presence actually worked in his favor, as their activity stirred up the sediment and revealed dozens of freshwater clams and crayfish that had been buried in the mud. When the raccoons finally left at dusk, Jasper emerged to find a feast waiting for him. But the real test came on the third day, when a great blue heron returned to the pond. These birds were Jasper's most dangerous predators, with lightning-fast reflexes and spear-like beaks that could snatch him up before he could react. The heron had clearly come back to check if the dropping water levels had created easy hunting opportunities. Jasper watched from his mud burrow as the heron waded into the shallows, its yellow eyes scanning the water with deadly precision. The bird was patient, standing motionless for nearly an hour, waiting for any sign of movement. Jasper knew that if he tried to surface for air, he'd be spotted immediately. That's when his bullfrog physiology became his greatest asset. Unlike mammals, he could absorb oxygen directly through his skin, especially in the oxygen-rich mud where he'd taken shelter. He slowed his heart rate and entered a state similar to hibernation, reducing his oxygen needs to almost nothing. The heron eventually gave up and moved on, but not before teaching Jasper a valuable lesson about patience and adaptation. Over the following days, as the water level continued to drop, he refined his technique. He learned to time his movements with the wind, using the ripples on the surface to mask his presence. He discovered which insects were most active during the cooler morning hours, and he mapped every inch of the pond's bottom to locate the richest feeding areas. A week into the drought, something remarkable happened. The other frogs began to return, not the ones who had fled, but new arrivals who had heard his mighty calls echoing across the landscape. They traveled from dried-up ponds and streams, following the sound that promised water and safety. Jasper found himself becoming not just a survivor, but a leader. He began to share his knowledge, showing the newcomers how to find the coolest spots during the heat of the day, where to locate the underground springs, and how to read the subtle signs that indicated a predator's approach. His pond became a refuge, a place where frogs could wait out the drought in relative safety. The breakthrough came during the second week, when Jasper discovered something that changed everything. While exploring the deepest part of his mud burrow, his sensitive skin detected a slight current, water moving through the sediment. Following this current, he found that it led to a network of underground channels that connected his pond to the larger creek system. This wasn't just a pond fed by surface runoff. It was part of a vast underground aquifer. Even if the surface water disappeared completely, the groundwater would continue to seep up through the mud, creating a permanent oasis in the middle of the drought. Armed with this knowledge, Jasper began to modify his environment. Using his powerful legs, he excavated small channels in the mud that would help the groundwater reach the surface more efficiently. He cleared debris from the natural springs and created deeper pools that would stay cool even during the hottest parts of the day. His efforts didn't go unnoticed. The pond began to attract other species, not just frogs, but salamanders, newts, and even a family of muskrats who had lost their home to the drought. Jasper's pond became a thriving ecosystem, a green oasis in an increasingly brown landscape. As the drought entered its third week, Jasper faced his greatest challenge yet. A group of local farmers, desperate to save their crops, had begun pumping water from any source they could find. When they discovered his pond, they saw it as a potential solution to their problems. But Jasper had learned to be resourceful. As the farmers set up their pumping equipment, he began a campaign of subtle sabotage. He would wait until nightfall, then use his powerful legs to kick sediment and debris into the intake pipes. He enlisted the help of the muskrats, who were expert at clogging waterways with sticks and mud. The farmers, frustrated by the constant equipment failures, eventually moved on to find easier sources of water. Jasper's pond was saved, but the experience taught him that survival sometimes required more than just adapting to natural challenges. It meant protecting his home from human interference as well. When the rains finally returned in the fourth week, Jasper's pond was one of the few wetlands in the region that had maintained a healthy ecosystem throughout the drought.